Let me take you onto a journey back in time, all the way to the year 2020. We all remember what happened. Pandemic, lockdown, the atmosphere of fear and uncertainty about future. At that time, I was holding a position in corporate finance, and I was managing a team of people. People that I couldn't even see in person in the office because of the COVID restrictions, many of whom had recently traveled from their home countries to take those jobs. Several months into the pandemic, I started noticing that one of my employees, let's call him Johnny for the sake of this story, started experiencing issues with the quality of his work. At first, I addressed it as any good manager would. I got closer to him and provided more coaching. I looked at Johnny through the lens of his performance scorecard. We were, after all, in a work environment. In spite of that, Johnny's performance continued to deteriorate to the point where it became obvious that he will not be able to keep his job. Around the same time, I got approached by a fellow manager, Tom, who knew Johnny personally and who told me that he had sensed Johnny was going through issues in his personal life. I decided to explore Tom's hunch and ask Johnny for a meeting. In the meeting, I opened up by asking him simply how he was doing and if anything was going on outside of work. My simple opening question turned into a beautiful and meaningful 2-hour conversation in which I was able to empathize with Johnny at a deeply human level. He told me he had been stressing about his job performance, had been spending most of the time alone in his apartment, and had been missing his family back home. I sensed Johnny could be going through some mental health issues, so I asked him to immediately seek professional help and take as much time as he needed off work to get better. In the end, he was diagnosed with depression, started treatment, took several months off work, and now he is still successfully working in the company and recently expanded his family. Having gone through this experience, it honestly scared me. Even though the outcome was positive in the end, I knew that I shouldn't have looked at Johnny only through the perspective of my corporate expectations. I failed in establishing the initial genuine human connection with him. So having gone through this, I made a pledge to myself. I decided to make sure that I introduce mental well-being at work. So how do I do it exactly? I intentionally introduce emotional intelligence through genuine connections. I make sure to start conversations about personal life with my colleagues and reportees. Every time I do it, I create a respectful, uninterrupted space. I switch off my phone and notifications and lock my laptop. Afterwards, I actively listen to the response. I try to put myself in the other person's shoes and really empathize with what they feel and go through. I always wait for the other person to finish and take a pause before responding. If I have a similar experience from my personal life, I offer it. By showing this vulnerability, I create a deeper connection. Then, I just let the conversation run its own course. Only when it is fully finished do I change the subject, especially if the next one is work-related. It doesn't really matter what the topic of the conversation is. When I meet a new colleague, those conversations may be seemingly trivial for the first several weeks or even months. However, by having those quality conversations consistently, day in and day out, I create a genuine relationship with the other person. The relationship that, if something bad happens with the other person, either helps them to confide in me or helps me in recognizing worrying signs that the person is going through. And I want to be there when something bad happens. I want my colleagues and my reportees to know that if they're facing challenges, their manager is not only there to assess their performance, but to also take care of their well-being. And this is particularly important with such a personal and elusive issue as mental health. The story of Johnny had a positive ending, but there are many mental health stories that do not end in a positive way. Today in the world, we have between 1 to 1.5 billion people experiencing some form of mental health issues. The most common ones being depression, anxiety, OCD, and various forms of personality disorders. It is estimated that mental health costs the global economy $1 trillion each year and is responsible for nearly half of 700,000 suicides. The picture already sounds pretty bad, but it only gets worse. Research shows that on average, people wait up to 10 years to reach out and get help from the moment they experience the first mental health symptoms. Try to imagine for a second how long that is. Depending on your age, it would mean living a quarter, a third, or even a half of your entire life with a mental health condition completely untreated. I, too, am a mental health statistic. At some point, I let depression and anxiety overstay their welcome in my life. For several years, I was living with a heavy ball and chain attached to my ankle, confining myself to the prison of my apartment. I cut all the social interactions. I only got help after several years, but essentially ended up losing that precious time. My mental health was no one's responsibility. Mental health issues are very often invisible. This is why it's so easy to overlook them. Think about it. If you come to work or school with a broken leg, wearing a cast, it is immediately understood by everybody that you will be incapacitated for several weeks. Your performance will be impaired. You will experience acts of kindness and sympathy from your colleagues, co-workers, classmates. And your managers and teachers may even cut you some slack with your work, or at least be completely fine with you not showing up in person and connecting remotely. If you show up at work or school experiencing depression, no one will notice. And even if they do, the stigma surrounding the subject will silence most of the conversations. Nobody will cut you any slack. Nobody will give you the benefit of the doubt. Quite the contrary. People will be very fast to pass judgment in case you cannot perform at a regular level. This is the unfortunate reality, and this is why it's extremely important we spread awareness about mental health. It needs to be commonplace. It needs to have a permanent place in our schools and workplaces where the majority of us spend a significant chunk of our times. We need to make sure that it's a part of performance scorecards and report cards. This is my vision, and this is what I personally implement. But I will not be able to do it alone. This is why you also need to act. You need to help normalize mental health conversations where you work or where you study. Start by introducing empathy. Start by switching off your phone, notifications, reaching out to the person next to you, your colleague, your classmate, your friend. Ask them how they're truly doing. I speak about this topic very often, and I mostly hear two excuses why people don't act and don't do it. The first one is, what do I actually know about mental health? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician. It's not really my area of responsibility. Or two, I'm not going to overstep somebody else's boundaries, ask how they're doing. I'm not going to be imposing on someone. To which I normally answer, no, that's true. The vast majority of you are not psychiatrists dealing with depression on the everyday basis, but neither am I. I merely create space for others to share. And trust me, you will never impose on anyone if you simply ask how the other person is doing. I actually wish somebody had asked me that when I was struggling. Normalizing mental health conversations is our joint responsibility. It is not only the responsibility of the person suffering or their closest family member. We need a support network across society. We need to make sure that we look after each other in our schools and our workplaces. By spreading awareness, can we and will we break the stigma? I really hope that after listening to me today, somebody gets inspired, goes out, and asks their friend, their colleague, their classmate, how they're really doing. They may be asked, waiting for a question, unable to communicate what they're going through. If even one of you does it, my work today was worth it.